Welcome. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Nancy Sturm with the Sextant Group. I've been friends with Jeannie for about the last 9 years. And one of the things that I love about her is how she brings this audience together. The idea of architects and clients, because at the end of the day, we're really all about just trying to build great teaching and learning environments, and we all need to be in the room to figure that out, right? So one of the things that I think is really important is including faculty in the whole planning process. Because when we were talking about ecosystems today and the whole conversation yesterday, it was really about how do we get faculty to buy into this? How do we move this whole idea forward? So I've taken a little bit different approach. I'm an educator by trade. I taught in Iowa for a number of years. I spent about 15 years with the Challenger astronaut families, running Challenger learning centers around the country, and so I've had an opportunity to experience some of this. So when I think about this, when I think about faculty, I think about how do I get their voice? How do I empower them into the whole planning process? So the first thing I have to ask myself is, especially in active learning, because a lot of times that comes from the top down. A lot of times you've read RFQs, architects have, you people have put RFQs together that say, we want the greatest, latest, newest active learning environments, and the faculty are standing there going, what's that mean? So I take a comment from Stephen Covey in The Eighth Habit that says, to know and not to do is not to know. So when I think about faculty, my first question is, how many faculty members on your campus, or you architects that are working with them, have been in an active learning environment as a learner? Like for them to be able to transfer that pedagogical theory into practice, you have to do it, right? That's how we learn. So when I started thinking about putting this whole process together, and when I was hired at the Sextant Group, they said, we want you to put workshops together to train faculty to move from didactic instruction to engaged learning. And I knew the last thing I could do is walk in to a room full of faculty with 50 PowerPoint slides and say, this is how you should teach. Isn't this a great idea? So knowing that that wouldn't work, I tried to pull together what I considered some of the strongest research around pedagogical approaches. So I thought about a real world event, right? You hear that that's what people should be doing. I thought about students constructing knowledge instead of students receiving information. And then I also thought about, with technology today, we can bring in the outside world. So what does that look and feel like? So when the Sextant Group asked me to design a workshop, I contacted my NASA buddies, and I said, I need to design a live simulation. And I needed around a live event. So we picked September 4th, 1996 on the island of Montserrat, where a hurricane's headed towards the island and a volcano's erupting. So if you walk into one of my workshops, you'll see volcano team, hurricane team, evacuation team, NASA team, and the faculty are going, whoa, I don't know anything about this. They sit down and I walk over and I say, what do you know and what do you need to know about being a volcanologist? And once they overcome the shock, they start talking about, well, I saw this on TV, or I read about this, I saw this YouTube video. So they're constructing knowledge about what it might be to be a volcanologist, to be a meteorologist. How do I save 8,000 people on the island of Montserrat? And then we go through this, I give them about 20 minutes, and then I walk over and hand them a Skype phone number, and they Skype a NASA expert. They Skype a volcanologist, they Skype a meteorologist, and that whole process is, faculty, you don't have to have all the answers. Bring in the outside world, because they're all right there. So we go through this, and then at the end of that whole process, we link live to the NASA Classroom of the Future, and they become the live simulation. We get live data every 6 minutes, latitude, longitude, wind speed, wind direction. They go crazy. But the beauty is, it's an aha moment for them. When we start debriefing and we talk about what is active learning, they were like, oh my God, that was so fun. Oh my gosh, I was forced to, so just tell you a quick story and then I'm gonna stop because I only have 4 minutes. Tarrant Community College, they asked me to come out and do this with 5 faculty sets, and the dean sat in the session the entire time. And at the end of one of the sessions, a faculty member stood up and said, "I will never do this again. This was the most stressful thing I have ever been through in my life." I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. About a week later, the dean called me and he said, "Nancy, do you remember that lady?" I'm like, oh my God, I haven't slept for a week because of that. And he said, "You know what happened?" She walked up to me in tears. And she said, "You know what that did for me? It gave me empathy." I'm going to start crying telling it. It gave me empathy for the students that I teach that are faced with new curriculum. And I say, "What do you mean you don't get it?" And she said, "Now I know what that feels like." So in closing of my poster, it's just really about engaging faculty, trying to get them really excited and part of the process. So with that, I'll invite the next 3 architects up to take my place.
How's everybody doing? So I'm Shannon Dowling, and this is Laura Hall. We're from Air St. Rose. We're going to tag team this a little bit because, to be quite honest, neither one of us worked on this project. But it's the Siemens Griswold Environmental Hall. It's at Washington College, but the hall itself is actually about a mile away. It's on the Charles River in Maryland. And it's a space for their environmental sciences. It's a living building challenge project. I think the thing that strikes me personally about the project is it's a mixture of office space, classroom space, research space, class lab space, all in one building. So there's students learning there, there's professors working there, there's professors doing research there. So it's really all about experiential learning and hands-on learning, and it's taking that to the task. There's actually a laboratory where the river comes up through, and so it brings in the ecosystem into the building for the students to be able to work on projects right there, and then it streams it back out to the river. So it's really about putting learning on display and giving the students this hands-on experience for them to kind of get messy and dirty.
And one small thing to add to that is that the building materials itself was used to be a teaching tool for the students. So you hear that a lot, but for one, the cedar material is a vernacular material to the small town. So there's a lot of Victorian houses. So the scale and the design was derived and took cues from the Victorian town nearby. So that's one interesting feature. So they use that cedar material to make a cedar rain screen, and we have a consultant who helped us design details for thermally broken clip systems to be on the rain screen. A lot of spray foam insulation for really high R value, which is helping us achieve a 105% net positive with all the photovoltaics up on the roof. There's 372 cell panels up there. Then on the porch, they actually used a different type of PV panel, which is a bifacial panel, so you can actually look up and see through it. So it's a transparent glass PV material. So they wanted to engage, welcome people visiting on the porch and be able to look up and see that the technology that's helped powering the building is really integrated into the whole experience of the building. So that's one of the few unique pieces to this project. So it's a brownfield site. It's a mile away from the campus, and it's connected with pedestrian paths and bike paths, and there's also a dock. So there's the crew team has a dock here. It's also where the pump shed is for pumping the water into the labs that Shannon was mentioning. So it's really a unique solution to some really local environmental challenges that they're having. So.
Several years ago now, we were recanting kind of our day. It was ourselves and our younger children. And they were telling a story, what had gone on in school. And as they were describing the event, we were pretty sure we could identify the protagonist. We were pretty sure that it was a young lady. We'll call her Bethany. But we're pretty sure that it was Bethany. Bethany walked in an aluminum cage. Bethany had a full-time nurse. Bethany had a feeding tube. And as they were telling this story, we were trying to ask questions to confirm whether this was in fact Bethany. And our child said, "You know Bethany, she's the one with the curly hair." I think we've come a really long way in terms of inclusivity for education, but not necessarily in the places where we affect that education. So education is certainly more inclusive and accepting and supportive than it used to be. Learning environments, not necessarily as much. Schools perhaps more so than other learning environments, but the workplace is a learning environment, right? We don't want people to cease learning when they go to work. Few people report doing their best work at work or their best thinking at work. We know these statistics, right? 44% of people say that they had a good idea why they were commuting or traveling. 30% while they're exercising. 5% in the shower. That seems low. But only 1% at work. Only 1% of people think they're doing their best thinking while they're at work, right? This is tragic. I submit it's likely because the office does precious little to support all the different ways in which we think. It doesn't support all the modes of learning and thinking and processing. It does support very well the verbal and the mathematical, which we've predicated for a long time, and even our SATs have those very same categories. But this poster documents and posits an environment, a habitat where this would be more possible. This isn't a built project, but it's a proposition. The poster is a call. It proposes a physical environment to support all the additional modes of thinking, to encourage each of the multiple intelligences, not only the verbal and the mathematical, but also the visual and the musical and the physical, the kinesthetic, either in isolation or in combination. So whether we're working in a solitary fashion or in groups. It proposed a habitat where it might be possible for us to say things like, I'll read while you paint, or your team should dance while my team sings. The poster acknowledges the distinction between realizing that physical environment and what we can achieve of that environment or that habitat physically and what else is required. We can achieve habitats like this technically, right? We've heard and seen some of these. They're documented on the projects. We walked through one earlier today. But in addition to what can be achieved technically, there's still work to be done with things that are cultural or structural or involve language or even policy. This is an architect standing before you recognizing the limits of architecture. But when accomplished, right, the habitat will expand the workforce. It will do it in two ways. It'll magnify the aptitudes and skills of the individuals who are considered within today's conventional workforce, right? But it will also extend that population by more easily including and accepting a wider sense of the population. It's really important to me that it's both. That it's both magnifying the people that are already there, but being able to better include the people that aren't there yet, and allowing each and all of us to bring our whole selves and our authentic persons to work. So this colloquium, as I understand, started in 1992, something like that, right? So that many years ago, you do the math yourself, a lot of what's documented on these posters wasn't quite possible or was just beginning, right? So there's been a lot of good work. We have a lot to take faith in. But you know, hopefully what's posited in this poster will soon exist. I know elements of it already do. And so in the spirit of a colloquium, I welcome the further discussion. I put this up, and then I ask for your help in identifying allies, resources, impediments, issues that have to do with the realization of this. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jean Roberts. I'm with Ellenzweig from Boston, and I'm presenting the Michigan State University New STEM Learning Complex. We designed the building along with the collaborating architect IDS, which is a local architect in Michigan. This building we're really excited about. It has a lot of the qualities that we've been talking about this weekend. I'm going to walk through the building and describe the permeability, the inclusivity, and the ecosystems that we've been talking about. Every step of the way through this project, I think that we've been really focused on those ideals, and it's wonderful to be talking about them today. The building is under construction, will be finished in 2020, next fall. It's 175,000 gross square feet. 75% of the building is new, and 25% is repurposed power plant, a power plant from the 1940s. So there's some wonderful ideas of bringing together the new and the old. And the basic concept of the building is the power plant is the center, is the hub, the collaborative place amongst the STEM facilities. It is surrounded by labs. But here at Michigan State, they don't consider labs as, they don't consider science labs. They consider it a creative space. So it's studios, which as an architect, I love that ideal of creating science. And so all of the spaces are called studios. So this building is located right next to the stadium. It's on the crossroads of a major circulation strip through the campus where non-science majors as well as science majors can walk through the building, and there they can integrate through the fabric of the building. When you enter the building, you enter into this 3-story, very glassy space. At 2 corners of the building, there's a similar glassy space, open, with on the first floor is a studio which is considered, we talk about it as a whatever space. It's not a maker space, it's a whatever space. It's whatever you bring to this space. Garage doors open up, students can see what's going on. One day a car might be moved in and people could tinker with that car. The next day you could bring in plywood and build a tiny house. And the next day a volcano might erupt in that space. So it's a place for creativity right in the beginning, the front door of the campus, of the building, where all campus students can see creativity happen. So that is a very glassy space. When you move through the rest of the new building, you get into the studio spaces. Here's an image of one of the ballroom-style laboratories, which means that it's very open with movable walls. There's the ceiling grids, as you had seen today in the building that we visited, ceiling grid with all of the electrical and gas connections coming down off of that grid. There are movable columns through the building where more services can come down right to the student. And it's designed so that each semester, a different science program or a different program can move into these spaces. So it's very flexible, very inclusive. And throughout these ballroom-style studio spaces, glass walls allow students to always be looking in and seeing what is going on inside. Next to these spaces are breakout places where more students can collaborate. And then the third part of the last part of the building I wanted to talk about is the power plant. The power plant, the permeability I like to talk about is history, is the combination of space and time. And so when you move through that historic part of the building, you see all of the artifacts from the original power plant. Even the boiler is still there, and students can walk through the boiler, and there are places to sit inside the boiler, and you really understand history. It's a place where there's collaboration, where there's food for nourishment, there's a help center for support, and it's where all students around campus can come and congregate in this new STEM learning complex.
I'm Jen Brophy. This is my colleague, Tim Winstead, and we work for U and Cole. Together, we're going to talk about the Cyber and Engineering Academic Center up in West Point, New York for the United States Military Academy. This project provided a lab building, no classrooms, no offices, purely labs, 59 unique labs for just this building for civil and mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, and systems engineering. It was a joint venture with U and Cole, and they were responsible for the site civil and exterior architecture, and then Tim and I were responsible for the programming, planning, and lab planning of the building. But we wanted to talk about the inclusivity within the United States Military Academy, which is a task in itself. They're not very inclusive the way they are. But it was really about starting to take their existing buildings and that their departments are kind of siloed in those buildings, and taking those departments and putting them together into one building, and for them to kind of start sharing resources and sharing data and sharing those labs. It was 136,000 gross square feet, and when Congress allocates a certain square footage to you, that is a hard line. So it was really negotiating and being creative in how those spaces can and should be shared, and which departments essentially had the same resources and same labs that could cross over between them.
The U.S. Army is less worried about other nations or other entities being able to outfight us. They're not worried about that. They got that. But they're really worried about that they might outthink us. Outthinking us is the biggest threat that we have. And so this particular facility, because we brought all the disciplines into the same location for the first time, is about getting the Army, these cadets, to think cross-disciplinary in ways that they've never had the chance to do it before. And it's only when they really attack a problem in that way will we stay ahead of the threat that exists out there. Again, we're not worried about anybody outfighting us, but we can gather more intelligence, we can create devices and instruments that are non-human contact, and we can move an amazing amount of material to any place on this planet in less than 24 hours. That's the threat that these guys basically create. We don't want to go to war. We just want to protect ourselves by not going to war. Thank you.
I'm John Wilkins. I'm with Gould Evans, and I'm going to talk to you about the Earth Energy and Environment Center project. Is that not loud enough? The Earth Energy and Environment project that we did for the University of Kansas. And as I've been sitting here kind of listening to this conference and just thinking of connectivity, connectivity of this building to the rest of the campus, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But before I dive in, to just give you a little bit about KU, when we started this project, they had one active learning classroom on campus. All their labs were built as just kind of individual labs for their researchers. And our campus is on Mount Oread, so it's up on a ridge, our main campus, and then it's kind of expanded down the hill and then across the street where all our research facilities are. So a few years back, they did a master plan, and they came up with this idea of Innovation Way to try to connect main campus all the way over to West Campus. And this building was kind of the hub or the start of that kind of Innovation Way. So our site was just a postage stamp piece of a site that had about a 50-foot grade from the top of the hill down. There was an existing bridge or existing tunnel that was in the middle of our site where most of the students kind of navigated over to the engineering complex that had to go through there. We had two distinct donors on this project that had very different ideas. And so, and then basically what we were trying to do was build a building to bring geologists and engineering together and to kind of solve complex problems from that standpoint. So we put a 141,000 square foot building, 5 stories tall at the low end, 3 stories at the top, with a tunnel, maintaining a tunnel connection underneath. And so we have 3 bridges. We bridge between the 2 donor buildings, we bridge across the street to engineering, and we bridge to the geology building from that standpoint. And this really is the start of Innovation Way. We built a 2-story active learning classroom right at the hub with glass all around the top. And that is now the feature of the campus tours on campus. So they bring all the students from main campus through this building, past the active learning classroom, and so on. The building is organized really as a single loaded corridor. And so one of the challenges at KU is with their labs is we get new researchers in. Every time a new researcher would come in or they changed the research, it was $1 million renovation. So we created really big, wide, flexible labs with no walls and glass all the way around. So when you stand in the lab, You can see all the way through the building from east to west. You can see your neighbors, and so it's really just about bench space that people get from that standpoint. And so the space that goes up 50 feet, we call that the edu lobby. And that's where we put all the conference rooms, all the student collaboration areas, all the breakout rooms from that standpoint. And unlike some of our other labs on campus where there's a lobby and then you need a key card to even get past and into the labs, every student on campus can migrate from main campus all the way down. And it turns out to be, this building serves as our ADA route to navigate down that. So, any student from on campus can go down there and they can kind of see what's going on. There was an industry outreach component to this, so they wanted a conference center. And so one of the things we did with the conference center was instead of building it all in one kind of contiguous suite, we distributed it up through the building. So we've got the auditorium down on the ground level, but we brought the industry partners up next to the labs all the way up the building from that standpoint. And then the last kind of cool thing that we integrated in is that we have an artist in residence down at the lower levels. So we worked with the Spencer Art Museum and actually brought over a space for an artist that's in here. So thank you.
Hi, my name is William Dodge. I'm from Hanbury. I think I have the honor of having the least amount of words on my board possible. And until Paul spoke at the very end of his, I thought I was the only person who had a board that wasn't actually a real project. But yeah, thanks for that. I come from a long line of educators. My family have been educating for more than 150 years in a variety of different capacities. And as somebody that spent 15 years off and on in higher education, I think it's somewhat ironic that I run a higher education kind of classroom academic standpoint for my firm, specifically for national higher education classrooms and learning. So this project is actually stemmed from an idea that I had that I've been kind of thinking about for 10, 15 years of, I honestly think it's highly irresponsible to build single-use academic buildings. I think we should be ashamed of ourselves if we're doing that, especially when we're talking about students that are graduating with $500,000 or $250,000 in student debt. We're heating and cooling buildings 16 hours a day when they're not being used. How do we start thinking about using these buildings smarter? Thinking about kind of Le Corbusier's kind of whole idea of buildings working as a machine. How do we turn our buildings themselves into a Swiss Army knife, essentially, so they can serve a variety of functions? We had an opportunity to renovate a library at William Peace University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And a buddy of mine, one of my business partners, Jesse Green, and I, when we were kind of iterating on this idea, we came up with this idea of this flexible classroom prototype that could be a variety of different things, whether it could be a makerspace, it could be a student success center, it could be tutoring, it could be a classroom, it could be a lot of different things. And as Jesse was walking out the door to go to the interview, I couldn't make it that day. I told him, I said, make sure to tell them that they're getting 11 rooms for the price of one. Because basically what we did was figure out, it's almost basically using a Sol-LeWitt type equation, all the possibilities of filling in the space, all the possibilities of using this one single classroom to serve a variety of needs. And I think it's something we should be thinking about. In today's society, with the oversaturation of undergraduate degrees and student loans, we really need to be thinking about creative solutions to this complex problem that is higher education. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Christine Sheridan, and I'm from HMA2 Architects in New York City. I'd like to present the American University of Central Asia, which is in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. The Bishkek was a former Soviet Union country, and it was along the ancient Silk Road. And the project was funded by George Soros, and his goal was to create leaders for the democratic transformation of Central Asia. The building, when Henry Meyerberg, who's the owner of the firm, first visited the existing university, it was this old government building, and it was dark and huge and grim. And he walked in and he was shocked to find this buzz of activity. And they didn't have many social spaces in the university. And so what it did is it created this a lot of activity and density and a buzz. So when the university needed to move out of the building because the government wanted the building back. So we said, how are we going to create this energy and translate it into this new building? And we had the rare opportunity to build a campus from the ground up. So we found that there's 3 main ingredients: density, visibility, and flexibility. And so for this university has only 125 square foot per student. And because it is so dense, it creates a lot of energy and interaction amongst people and creates community. The president of the university wanted a space where the entire university could gather. So we made an atrium, which was an everyday living room and could be transformed into an event space. From the atrium, you could see everything that was going on in the university. You could see the dining hall, the gymnasium, the library, information services, and it's this visibility that promotes participation. And so we have 60 classrooms that's all around the perimeter of the building, and between the atrium and the classrooms, what we did is we widened the spaces. So instead of having classroom, corridor, classroom, this double-loaded corridors, we widened them and made study lounges. So instead of walking through hallways, you're walking through the study lounges. This really brought the whole university together. The atrium provided this visibility, provided orientation, but also a way to participate, see things that you wanted to participate in. So for the exterior of the building, we have these. One of the things that we learned when we were there is all the meetings with engineers and construction workers were all around generous portions of food and tea. And so what we wanted to do is to reflect that, because food is what brings people together, and sharing food facilitates sharing ideas. So the building has 3 red boxes on the exterior, which are cafes that we put on every single academic floor. So it's we have made all flexible furniture, but that's movable, lightweight, and we design a lot of the furniture ourselves. And it's not, we want people to be able to move it to create collaborative environments, but also have the furniture be interchangeable into different spaces. So as the needs grow and change, the furniture can be flexible in different spaces. And so this is our dense little matrix of our little beehive in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you.
So my name's Damon Shepard. I'm with HOK. We're architects. I'm based out of Washington, D.C. So I'm going to ask you guys to show your hands for a minute. So how many of you in this room have either been involved in the design, construction, or discussions around some sort of interdisciplinary facility on your campus? Okay, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. All right. Now, of you, how many of you had an intentional kind of workplace strategy for the faculty and administrative spaces associated with that? If you didn't, put your hand down. Okay, that's pretty good. All right. So what we found is that there's been so much intensity placed on interdisciplinary learning and research spaces for the students, but we haven't placed as much of that emphasis on the spaces that are accommodating our faculty and staff. And the challenge there is that we're putting this pressure on these buildings and on these departments, but we're not creating environments where we're encouraging the faculty to live what we expect them to go out and teach, all right? So one of the things that I found was very interesting is that on the typical kind of public four-year institutional campus, about 23% of the square footage is office space or office support space, all right? So that's this big one here. If you take classrooms, instructional labs, and research labs together, you're at about 18%, right? I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's good or bad. But what it means is we really need to be thoughtful, and we need to get it right, because that's almost a quarter of our footprint on campus, so we really need to be thinking about it. What I've done on this board is, through 3 different projects, talked about our thinking for the academic workplace, all right? We've seen kind of 4 key themes that we should be thinking about, because I don't think there's any one right answer for any institution. And if you come to an institution with that supposition, you're going to fail miserably, right? So you need to be prepared to dissect the needs of that institution and apply the framework. One of the first things we think about is adaptability, right? Not unlike, the typical workplace outside of academia, we're all spending more time on campus. And our day is getting stretched, and a lot of it's being stretched by technology, right? We're not limited to when we're in the classroom or when we're in the office to be able to do our work. So how we can start creating environments that are more human-centric, maybe bringing a little bit of a hospitality or residential feel to that space to create a better work-life balance and a more comfortable environment, is really a key component of how we can properly design that workplace. Visibility, social interaction, and energy, all right? So how we can start to create opportunities for faculty members within different groups to come together, to visually see one another, to not go down their little cells into their departmental suite and never cross paths, but to actually be intentional about potentially having a space that's a faculty breakout space that's visible from a public space, and having that visibility translate back, right? That's a key component of how we start to break that down. Choice, focus, and collaboration. At one of the tables I sat out today earlier, someone was talking about their kids at home like to go to different parts of the house depending on what they're doing and what activity, right? Sometimes they're going to go to their bedroom and listen to music. Sometimes they're going to sit on the couch and be on their laptop, right? We don't all do our best work in the same place all day long, right? Depending on what the activity is, there are better environments that are more conducive. So creating choice environments within that workplace is a key part of that. There are some times where you've got to be head down and focused, other times where you want to be able to be more collaborative. And how we create a workplace environment that starts to be sensitive to that is important. And then the last thing is flexibility, right? We know that frequently departments are growing and contracting over a series of years. We don't always know which ones are going to do what. But what we do know is if we create physical barriers that lock in and say, okay, this is that department, and here are walls around it for that suite, you're instantly building in a problem. So how we can start to create this space that still maintains a level of identity and allows you to have some level of roots for the group, but not locking them into a physical constraint that can't flex with the ebbs and flow of a department, is something we have to stay away from. So, I'm happy to entertain questions later, but this is just our thinking around a framework and an approach to the new academic workplace.
Thank you.
Good evening. How's everyone doing? Still awake? Yep. Sweet. I'm Jessica Figgenholtz with Perkins & Will, and what I wanted to do was share the story of Bowie State University and their new Center for Natural Sciences, Mathematics, and Nursing. And I think I could probably stand up here and talk about the program, which includes a lot of space typologies that you've heard about today, active learning classrooms, research labs, learning on display, collaboration, transparency. Are those all the buzzwords? Am I hitting all of them? But what I really wanted to talk about was the story and the essence of this building. Really, what is the heart and soul that drove the university to bring it forward? And for those of you that are not familiar, Bowie State is one of our nation's oldest historically black colleges and universities. This building was specifically designed to empower and inspire and increase minority success in the STEM profession. If I was giving a formal presentation, I'd have a chart that shows the percentages of where those that are going through the STEM profession and with diverse backgrounds, where there is that gap. And so with this building specifically, these programs were spread around campus. There was no synergy, there was no overlap and sharing of resources. So the intent was to bring them to one central, vibrant location and begin to let faculty, staff, and students, one, see each other, understand what they're working on, and see how they could leverage those partnerships to increase recruitment, retention, and really put that STEM education and pedagogy on display. But I think what really takes this project to the next level, at least this is what we've heard from those that are actually occupying it for the last couple years, is the true integration of the branded environments team with our design team. They spent lots of time understanding the essence and the ethos of each three departments. And because of the deep roots of Bowie State, there's inspiration of some traditional African fractal patterns that created this visual framework for each of those departments' identity and wayfinding throughout the building without losing their own identity, but tying it back to Bowie State. So I think similar to the building we were in today, I think you saw every wing had its dedicated color, blue, red, green, but they all were integrated, and that experience, it was a seamless experience. You felt you were still in the same building, but you knew when you were in the nursing section or potentially the STEM section. And so it was this way of really, I think, tying together their heritage with the different departments, but creating a seamless experience that we're hearing when students walk in the door, they feel at home. They feel a sense of place. They feel welcome because the designers really listen to what the brand, what that communicates to them and to the community. And then also the beacon, that's part of Bowie State's signature torch. So I think combining it all and hearkening back to really what's rooted in the institution really is what's creating that story. And so yes, it has the program elements that I can talk to you offline all about if you want to hear about it. But for us, I think it was really what inspires students within the STEM program and how the building might start to articulate that and make them feel part of a larger community.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, I'm Rick Hines with Research Facilities Design, RFD. We're laboratory design consultants. In this case, the project of Valparaiso University, the Center for the Sciences, we were the lab consultant to Hastings and Chivetta Architects from St. Louis. Valparaiso, as you may or may not know, is located in northwestern Indiana, a small liberal arts institution, I think Lutheran-based. The project that we did there is 57,000 gross square feet and change, $21.6 million. So those of you that are on the coast would recognize this as a real bargain at $376 a square foot. Where I live in San Diego, it could be double that and then some. So they get quite a bargain in the Midwest. The faculty, this project percolated and evolved over a period of a decade or more before we really got going. The faculty and other stakeholders had a strong vision that the program of pedagogy should really drive the space needs and that they wanted to highlight the importance of the STEM disciplines at Valpo. Like most of you, we just heard a minute ago, improve recruitment and retention of the best faculty and students, to provide expanded undergraduate faculty student research opportunities to improve research outcomes, and of course modern AV and IT technologies, environmental sustainability, and so on, but a much more active and collaborative environment than their current previous Neal Science Center. So the process was very inclusive and iterative and participatory, broad group of stakeholders from across campus, science faculty, non-science faculty, staff, students, administrators, O&M, EH&S, accessibility, to really get that input. And I think that really, although nobody got exactly what they wanted on every wish list, everybody understood the process and how they ended up with where they were. One of the important lessons learned is the importance of user advocacy. Along the way, the faculty felt strongly that the project wasn't big enough to meet the critical mass. This building houses all of chemistry and micromolecular biology. And at one point, the project wasn't big enough to house the things necessary to create the critical mass between biology and chemistry and biochemistry. The faculty advocated, and the board ultimately approved a slightly larger project to where they could really get what they needed. So the building is sited in a different part of campus from the existing science building, closer to their School of Engineering, as what they called STEM Village Phase 1. The thought is that eventually there'll be a STEM Village Phase 2 that will go between this building and engineering, that will actually physically and sort of philosophically connect sciences and engineering as a true STEM district. Outcomes, I think, are pretty remarkable. The building itself is very inviting and welcoming to both science and non-science students. The building's kind of a modified parallelogram, and the pointy ends of the building have these very nice student study, breakout collaboration spaces that are occupied at all hours of the day and week. There's a nice scientific art piece, a mobile hanging there that was funded by the family of a soon-to-be retiring outgoing chemistry chair. So that's a nice legacy for him. And then, of course, active learning labs and classrooms that really support the hands-on, collaborative, team-based learning that they're proud of there. Faculty student research labs that have flexible benching systems that are adjustable height, pre-piped and pre-wired with quick connects at ceiling service panels, so that they can adjust the location of casework and benching based on the needs of the undergraduates that are using the lab for that particular term. Importantly, the building is a lot more transparent, a lot more permeable, so it really activates the corridor experience, and people passing through the building have a good sense of what's going on. So they've considered it very successful. We're looking forward someday to phase 2.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jeanette Blackburn from Shepley Bulfinch, and this is my colleague, Amanda Vigneault. I was the principal architect for this project at Loyola University, Baltimore, and Amanda developed the interior architecture. So the project is the Center for Innovative and Collaborative Learning at Loyola University, Maryland. And we were really excited when we heard the theme for this conference, because this building is very, very much about creating a permeable learning ecosystem. It's a building that creates connections among communities of faculty, between faculty and students, between students, faculty, and the community beyond. And so the building is an addition and renovation. It includes a historic architectural landmark on the central campus quad and a site that is currently a parking lot, but when the building is built, will face outwards towards the main entrance to the university. So they asked us to renovate the existing building for new ways of teaching and learning and faculty workplaces, and to create a new addition that would present a new and very open, welcoming, transparent, and forward-looking face to the city of Baltimore. We had a very long and thorough engagement process, although we did not have 62 sessions. But we really started at the beginning, building on some of the visioning work that Jeannie Narum had done, to be able to start to help faculty think really differently about how they could teach together, where they had overlaps that would develop more innovative curricular models, or subject-specific or diverse subjects in terms of the teaching curriculum that they were developing. And yeah, that's good. The exterior is limestone, which picks up on some of the colors of the native stone that the buildings of the historic quad are made of, but it also has a lot of glass, a lot of transparency, solar shading, and a new park that also opens up to create a new entrance to campus.
So on the interiors, we took a lot of cues from what the building was trying to do out into the community. So at its foundation, Loyola's collegiate mission is based on exploration. And we all understand that the higher education experience is really about discovery. So these buildings together, the solidity of the historic building, the transparency of the new building as it faces the community, really is about layering of spaces, transparency, and discovery, creating those moments that you want to go through and to and beyond. So in the heart of the ground floor of Beatty, which is now very confined, is what we're calling our Idea Lab. So it's an incubator space, glass enclosed, writable, movable furniture, all the things we've been talking about. But one of the interesting programmatic elements that we tried to do in this building is actually mix office, meeting, classroom, and informal spaces throughout the building. So within the various suites of the building, we'll have the traditional sort of academic offices. We've been interested in a lot of the research that a lot of the furniture manufacturers and HOK and others have been doing around what actually the office spaces should be like to support a researcher versus someone who's more involved in project-based learning. And they exist around these central collaborative spaces where we're encouraging students and faculty to get out of their spaces and work together. And they're sprinkled throughout the building. And one of the other really big decisions that they made into this building was bringing in the Career Center. So it's physically linking students to the mission of serving beyond and bringing the community in as well. And the building materiality throughout reflects a lot of the continuity of the architecture, since so much of the interiors you experience the glazing through to the other spaces. It was really important that it had a consistent visual experience, and we're really excited to actually see this project get built. Fall of 21, yeah. 2021.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so if I go over my 4 minutes, stop me, because I know we've been here for a while. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So I'm Julia Grabush, as I mentioned earlier, part of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, SOM. We're based in New York. We have offices all over the world. I had the great pleasure to work on the Milstein Center. This is a new teaching and learning center. It's a 12-story building located at Barnard College. For those who don't know, it's a women's liberal arts college located in Manhattan. So it was really a pleasure to work something in our backyard. We could just take the train to the Upper West Side. And what that allowed us to do is really work with students, faculty, and staff on an engagement process to define what the role of the library could be today and for the future. Even though the library is half of the total square footage, it's 128,000 gross square feet, there's also faculty offices, there's active learning spaces. In addition, there's 4 departments, including the Athena Center for Leadership Studies, the Barnard Center for Research on Women. And so we really met with a variety of groups. Bright Spot, we partnered with them in the programming process to really define what this building could be. The program was not given to us, and we had to work with the faculty, the staff, and the students to really envision what a library could be like in the 21st century. One of the important visionary aspects of what came out of that process had to do with the Lehman Lawn. And so here you can see in this image, for those of you who know Barnard, it's a dense urban campus. And so there was a small piece of green space that was fundamental to the education at Barnard. It was something that we had to protect during construction, and you can see here the massing of the building. Really, we tried to not limit the amount of light and access to the lawn space. And not only did we do that through the kind of podium and tower massing configuration, but we actually had green terraces which are occupiable and accessible to the students, faculty, and staff. And this not only maintained the amount of light on the lawn, but extended the amount of green space vertically up into the building. And in addition, you can see there's a kind of a central atrium space here. The books were a fundamental component to this project. There's 155,000 total volumes in this building. And so that was kind of fundamental to be incorporated into the space. However, you can also see that there's stairs. There's a communicating stair that connects all 4 stories of the library. And when you walk in the ground floor of the library, there's actually no books. And then the 2nd, 3rd, 4th floor, it increases the amount of stacks. And so in addition to the actual repository for books, there's also maker spaces. and things that really are about doing and making and creating a space for learning that's not just focused on the books themselves. And the last kind of anecdote that I'll add to this is, as an architect, there's many milestones that when you first win the competition, it's very exciting. When you submit construction documents, very exciting. When you see the groundbreaking of this project, one of the most important moments, at least in the 2-year process. I worked very closely with Meredith Boswick, which many of you know. And I got to tell you, though, last Monday I was in this building giving a tour, and even bigger than the groundbreaking or even bigger than the building opening, every single seat was filled in this building. And that, to me, was really impactful, because you can see how the 4 years of design and planning and construction really impacts students and faculty on a daily basis. And that's why it's been so invigorating to meet all of you this weekend to really see how we can create spaces that impact all.
Great, thank you. Okay, if we could have all the architects kind of go back to their posters, we'll do Q&A.
My question's for Damon. No, actually, awesome poster, great presentation, and love the topic. And I think a lot of us are interested in the same topic, particularly given the ratios of faculty office square footage on campuses. So I'm wondering if there are any breakthroughs that you can share that might be lessons learned for others about how are you accomplishing some of these goals while still satisfying confidentiality requirements, still satisfying attraction and recruitment demands for faculty that have pretty high expectations in order to come to a new institution, and if there's strategies that have worked.
So you'll notice not once during my presentation did I say open office or no office. I didn't do that. And the reason for that is if that's your lead, you've lost a big part of your audience at the beginning, all right? So what I've come to realize is that you have to first establish a baseline that all of these other things are important. Once we all agree that these other things are important, then there's a negotiation about what the give and take is to achieve that. Maybe it's a smaller footprint for the office. Maybe it's more stringent requirements around who really needs an office versus who doesn't need an office. I mean, that's kind of how you have to kind of slow walk it. I will say that we've gone through some projects where they were purely administrative functions, not academic functions at all. Those were a little easier because those discussions can be more top down, and they say, well, we will do this, and people say, okay. But when you're dealing with faculty, it's a lot more sensitive. So I think you got to get buy-in about what is important first, and then you have to come to an agreement about what we're willing to give up to get what's important.
Great answer, tough topic. Okay, another question.
So I live primarily in an IT world, so I don't know how much insight any of you have, particularly for the projects that were completed, about not necessarily the specifics of technology requests, but if you had any common things that you've noticed about capabilities, like technological capabilities that people want in their building. What kinds of engagement with technology are people looking for, and how are you implementing that in your projects? So that's for anybody.
As a technology company, I'll start, and then I'm going to pass it over as an educator, I start with the concept of a tool without a task has no context. So it's one thing to just put a bunch of stuff in a building, right? It's another thing to help faculty and students understand what you want technology to do. So we really put it towards the idea of you want to communicate, collaborate, create, share, publish. So we take it from that perspective as opposed to just saying, oh, you want something on this wall, something on that wall. So I'll start with that, and then I'm going to pass it.
In the case of the project at West Point, the cyber labs were on steroids. For the most part, the intent behind the labs is that one, technology changes every 2 years. So there was a raised floor system, which basically allows them to rewire, redo everything. At each station for each student or cadet in the cyber warfare labs, basically they could take one cable, reconnect, and be battling the people across the aisle. They could be battling half the room, could battle half the room. The next plug, they could basically battle the next room, the next plug. They could be 3 rooms all in warfare all at the same time. But all of that was wired back through a central server room that was dedicated to just those rooms. And the really strange part at West Point is they're not connected to the internet. Because of the military, they basically are protected and they have to control what access they have in and out. So all of this is done largely internally, and the wiring was, shall we say, overly sufficient to make sure they had all the capabilities necessary to do all the things they needed to do, both now and in the future.
I would echo everything that Nancy said, and also add that my overall advice is for classrooms, unless you really have the very sophisticated, users and media support structure to really manage and evolve that, don't overbuild. One of my favorite quotes from a librarian is, "We have so much technology in this library that it will be obsolete before we figure out how to use it." And what we hear most from faculty is consistency in every room and simple things that I don't have to worry about how it's going to run, because we have very few clients who actually have the technologist right around the corner or right next door to help at every moment.
I want to ask a generic question and ask Washington College to respond first. I love when you sent your poster in, I love the idea of this environmental thing in the middle of the, it seems so personal. How did you invite anybody? How were students involved in your planning? But I thought it in particularly that I'd like to hear how it's an environmental building. The students are studying and becoming environmentalists. So that's the end of my question. So.
I will honestly tell you that I do not know the answer to your question because I did not work on the project. Laura, I don't know, did they mention anything to you about it either? No. From what I understand, Washington College came to Air St. Gross with a program already in hand. So I'm not sure if there were students involved in the making of that program or not. I can find out for you though, Jeannie. Yeah. Yes, I would bet so. I will find that story out and I will share it with you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then I think Jeannie's on. Oh, sure.
One thing I'd really like to clarify for the group is we have an incredible amount of design talent that's in the room. And we may be architects and masters of, our craft, but nobody's going to know your needs the way that you do. So I would encourage you to insert yourself deeply into design teams whenever you have the opportunity to be a part of a project. I do a lot of maker spaces, and one of the things that I've come to realize is the world's greatest innovators are inherently the people that don't know any better. And we're too predisposed to what we think is and isn't a good idea, and we need you all to be able to push us forward continuously.